We're here to celebrate the music of two great American jazz composers, Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn. Before we get started, I just want to thank some fellow friends, musicians. We have Jerry Capucci on saxophone, John Morano, saxophone, friends Jane and Charlie, also Tom, right? It's great to see fellow musicians coming out to support other musicians. So here we go. We're going to start off with Duke Ellington, 1920. I'm going to go through the 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70s. So Duke Ellington, he was born in 1899 in Washington, D.C. Then he died in 1974. And he's considered to be America's greatest all-around musician. He's a composer, orchestrator, arranger, songwriter, bandleader, conductor, accompanist, and soloist. So Duke Ellington, he's a prominent figure in the history of jazz, right? And his music stretched out into all different genres, including blues, gospel, film scores, popular music, and classical music. And his career has spanned for more than 50 years and included Ellington as the band leader, leading his orchestra, and then composing an exhaustible songbook of 3,000 compositions. He scored compositions for movies. For an example, in 1959, the Otto Preminger movie, Anatomy of a Murder. And he did extensive world tours with his band. So basically, due to Ellington's inventive use of the orchestra, and thanks to his eloquence and charisma, he elevated the perception of jazz to a higher level. Ellington, he was born in 1899 to James Edward Ellington and Daisy Kennedy Ellington in Washington, D.C. And both his parents were pianists. The mother played parlor songs, and the father preferred operatic operas. So at the age of 7, Ellington, he began taking piano lessons. And then his mother would always surround her son with dignified women to reinforce his manners and to teach him to live in an elegant manner. So Ellington's childhood friends noticed this change in his behavior, his casual, offhanded manner, and his easy grace, and his dapper dress. So he had the bearing of a young nobleman. So his friends started calling him Duke Ellington, right? So Ellington began listening and watching and imitating ragtime pianists in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and Atlantic City. He started playing gigs in cafes and clubs in the Washington, D.C. area. And at first he played in other ensembles, and then in the late 1917, he formed his own group called the Duke Serenaders. Ellington played throughout the Washington, D.C. area and to Virginia for private social balls. And Ellington, he made his first recording in November of 1924. And he cut tunes for different record companies, for Sony, Universal, BMG, under a variety of other names, pseudonyms. The band moved to the Cotton Club in Harlem on December 4th, 1927, and then they performed their radio broadcast concerts directly on stage for 3 years at the Cotton Club in New York City. So at this time, we're going to play a composition that Duke Ellington composed entitled Ring Dem Bells. Ring Dem Bells from 1930. Bells in 1930. Okay, moving along here. We have Billy Strayhorn, born in November 29, 1915 in Dayton, Ohio. He was a great American jazz composer, pianist, lyricist, arranger, and best known with his collaboration with Duke Ellington. He was born in Dayton, Ohio, and he moved to the Homewood section of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His parents, Strayhorn, he spent many of his months of his childhood at his grandparents in Hillsborough, North Carolina. And in an interview, Strayhorn said that his grandmother was the primary influence for the first 10 years of his life. He became interested in music while living with her, playing hymns on the piano and playing records on a Victrola. So Strayhorn, he returned back to Pittsburgh and attended Westinghouse High School, and he accomplished 4 goals. He was studying music, classical music at the Pittsburgh Music Institute, and then number two, he was also writing a high school musical. Number 3, he formed a musical trio that played on a daily local radio station. And still, while in his teens, he was composing songs with lyrics. These are great compositions at an early age, entitled such as Little Brown Book, Lush Life, Something to Live For. So at this time, we're going to play one of my favorite compositions, Lush Life by Billy Strayhorn. Beautiful ballad, written from 1933 to 1938. He performed it on November 13th, 1948 with Duke Ellington Orchestra at Carnegie Hall. And the song's lyrics describe the author's weariness for the nightlife. So growing up in a working class neighborhood in Pittsburgh, he dreamed of a more cultured and cosmopolitan way of life. Billy Strayhorn, he was only 16 when he wrote the majority of the song, which actually became his signature composition. The words Strayhorn wrote as a teenager predicted the life that he would actually eventually lead. He did become a socialite, and he did travel to France, and unfortunately he became an alcoholic. But a great musician. So here we go with Lush Life. Great, thank you. Mitchell Schechter on piano. Okay, moving to the 1930s. We have Duke Ellington. He released many recordings. 1931 is a great selection called Rockin' in Rhythm. Also 1931, Creole and Rhapsody. The famous, very popular composition in 1932. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got the swing. Beautiful ballad, 1933, Sophisticated Lady. 1934, another beautiful ballad, Solitude, and then very energetic composition, Caravan, right, in 1936. And in terms of concerts, Ellington's band performed at clubs and concert halls across the USA. In reference to movies, in 1934, the band appeared in the Mae West film, Belle of the 90s, right? The band also played on soundtracks of a 1934 film called Many Happy Returns. In 1936, the band returned to Hollywood and recorded music for a Marx Brothers film entitled A Day at the Races. And then he also recorded a film in 1937 entitled Hit Parade. So here we go with favorite composition, It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing, composed by Ellington in 1931, with lyrics by Irving Mills. And the music was written and arranged by Ellington in August of 1931 during intermissions at a Chicago Lincoln Tavern. That was the location, and it was first recorded by Ellington and his orchestra for Brunswick Records in 1932. And Ivy Anderson, she sang the vocal, and trombonist Joe Nanton, an alto saxophone player, Johnny Hodges, played the instrumental solos. So the title is actually based on a credo of Ellington's former trumpeter, Bubber Miley, great trumpeter. And he would always say, "It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing." And that became a super hit, so here we go. Strayhorn in the 1930s. Uh, so Billy Strayhorn, he was introduced to the music of pianists like Art Tatum, Teddy Wilson at the age of 19. And these musicians guided him into the realm of jazz, which he remained for the rest of his life. His first jazz exposure was a combo called the Mad Hatters that played around Pittsburgh. So Strayhorn, at the age of 22, he had the opportunity to meet Duke Ellington at the Stanley Theater in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in 1938. And during that concert, Duke Ellington, he performed the great ballad, beautiful solo on In a Sentimental Mood, right? So during the break, Ellington invited Strayhorn backstage, and Strayhorn said, I'm going to play the solo that you just played. He was able to remember it, note for note. And the same rhythms and the same melody. He performed the solo that Ellington just played a few minutes ago. And Ellington was so impressed by his performance that he said he wanted to have him join the band. So he joined Ellington's band in 1939 at the age of 22. And Ellington, he loved what he saw in Billy and took this shy, talented young pianist under his wings. And nobody really knew the true function of this, how this would work. But the musical talents attracted to each other. And then at the end of the year, Strayhorn became an essential element to the Ellington band by arranging and composing and sitting in at the piano. And almost immediately, Billy Strayhorn, he made a rapid and almost complete assimilation of Ellington's style and technique in terms of melodic style, rhythms, and the same harmonic style as Duke Ellington. So over the next 30 years, Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn worked on over 500 compositions and arrangements. Strayhorn, he worked as a composer, the pianist, a collaborator, an arranger for Duke Ellington, as well as the Duke Ellington Orchestra. And some of Strayhorn's most famous compositions were, check them out on the internet or Spotify, Chelsea Bridge, Lush Life, Johnny Come Lately, Take the A Train, Lotus Blossom, Rain Check, Star-Crossed Lovers, A Flower is a Lovesome Thing, and Satin Doll. Great, beautiful compositions. We're going to take one of those compositions and perform them today, which is called Take the A Train, which is, everybody assumes that it's recorded by Duke Ellington, but is actually composed by Billy Strayhorn in 1939. So Ellington, he offered a job to, Ellington, he offered a job to Billy Strayhorn, and he gave him money to travel to Pittsburgh from New York City, and he gave him directions. He said, basically, take the A train. So the A train became the signature tune of the Duke Ellington Orchestra and was recorded in 1941. And this song marked the beginning of a decade-long partnership between Ellington and a shy young composer named Billy Strayhorn. So here we go with Take the A Train. Mitch Hector, you got the last note in. He gets extra credit for that. All right, 1940s, Duke Ellington. Some of his recordings, once again, I Got It Bad and That Ain't Good. It was released. Ellington Instrumental, 1940. Concerto for Cootie, great trumpeter, Cootie Williams. And then in 1943, he had the opportunity to return to composing extended compositions with the first of a series of annual recitals at Carnegie Hall. And on January 23 of 1943, he premiered the composition Black, Brown, and Beige. 1943 to 44, another famous popular release was Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me. It became actually a top R&B hit. 1944, I'm Beginning to See the Lights. Now, in terms of reference to concerts, right, Ellington's band performed at clubs and concert halls throughout the U.S. And at the end of the war, Ellington's period as a major commercial force on the record industry came to an end. So as a result of that, Ellington simply went on to tour. That became one of his major goals at that period of time, just to tour throughout the world and the U.S. In reference to stage musicals, in 1941, that same summer of 1941, Ellington was in Los Angeles, where he staged a musical entitled Jump for Joy, and that ran for 101 performances on July 10th, where it actually started. What about Broadway? He was popular with, influential with, in 1946, where he teamed up with John LaTouche, writing the music for a Broadway musical called Beggar's Holiday, which opened on December 26th, 1946. So right now we're going to play a beautiful ballad, I Got It Bad and That Ain't Good. It's a jazz standard, music written by Duke Ellington and lyrics by Paul Francis Webster in 1941. It was introduced in the musical review entitled Jump for Joy by Ivy Anderson, who also provided vocals for Duke Ellington and his orchestra on a single recording. It was a Victor recording. So now the West Coast musical Jump for Joy review opened up on July 10th, 1941 at the Mayan Theater in Los Angeles and ran for 101 performances. So this is our version of I Got It Bad. Maestro introduction. Got it bad, and that ain't good. Let's see, in 1941, Billy Strayhorn, he traveled to California with Duke Ellington, with the band, and was introduced to Lena Horne. And he worked with Lena Horne at a Hollywood club called the Little Trost Club. In 1948, the Downbeat Readers Poll announced that Billy Strayhorn was the best arranger. That's a great accomplishment. 1949, Nat King Cole was the first person to record and release Billy Strayhorn's song Lush Life. Billy Strayhorn, he was a musician that had great skills as a pianist, composer, and arranger. He was involved with recording projects. Number two, involved with Broadway shows, composing and arranging. Also musical productions for clubs and theaters. And as a pianist, and he was an accompanist for vocalists and a well-established pianist. This is a beautiful composition that we'd like to perform now. It's not too well known, but it's called A Flower is a Lonesome Thing. This is a Billy Strayhorn composition. So at this period of time, 1940s, Duke Ellington called on his son Mercer and Billy Strayhorn, and he asked them to join him in California to write new material for the band, since they were not affiliated with ASCAP. Now, ASCAP is a organization called the American Society for Composers, Authors, and Publishers. So they were on strike, so nobody could write any music if you were a part of that. So this is a great opportunity for Mercer and Billy, because they were not members. They got the break at this time to write a whole new book of tunes for the band. And all the tunes had to be in their names, which is another positive aspect for these young composers and musicians. Great opportunity for Mercer, Ellington, and Strayhorn to get exposure, recognition for their compositions. Some of the titles are Rain Check. These are Strayhorn compositions, and then Passion Flower, Chelsea Bridge, and of course, A Flower is a Lovesome Thing. So here we go with our version of A Flower is a Lovesome Thing. Billy Strayhorn. Beautiful composition. Okay, in the 1950s was a difficult period for Ellington because some of the musicians left for other opportunities, but then later returned to the band. The band made a major comeback at the Newport Jazz Festival on July 7th, 1956, when they kicked into the version of a diminuendo and crescendo in blue, very famous composition, which featured saxophonist Paul Gonzalez, who took an extensive, memorable solo, which is on a recording. So Ellington, he appeared on the cover of Time magazine, and he signed a new contract for Columbia Records. He concentrated more on extended compositions for the rest of his career, starting at this point in the 50s. His comeback as a live performer led to increased opportunities to tour, and in the fall of 1958, he undertook his first full-scale tour of Europe. So for the rest of his life, he would have an extremely extensive tour schedule, busy traveler throughout the world. Ellington, he also appeared in and scored in a 1959 film, Anatomy of a Murder. And its soundtrack won him 3 of the newly instituted Grammy Awards. So a tune from this period of time, which is extremely popular. As you know, it's Satin Doll. Satin Doll was written by Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn, with lyrics by Johnny Mercer. It was written in 1953. The tune was recorded countless times with artists such as Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra, and Nancy Wilson. And it's possible to say that the music was not co-composed by Ellington, but solely by pianist, arranger Billy Strayhorn, who worked with Ellington. So Ellington, he originally wrote the composition and he threw it in the garbage, and then Strayhorn picked it up, and he saw these different riffs that Ellington wrote, and he actually used it as a sketch, and he added harmony and lyrics, and he entitled it Satin Doll, which is Strayhorn's pet name for his mother. He would call her Satin Doll. So this was an extremely popular song, and it was used as a closing number for most of the concerts for Duke Ellington. Ray, thank you for the applause. Billy Strayhorn, 1950. There we go. Recorded many solo albums. An example, he had the Billy Strayhorn Septet in 1958. During this period of time, he worked on recordings with Johnny Dankworth, an English composer, a saxophone player who wrote many compositions for film scores. Two famous Strayhorn compositions that were recorded in the 50s was 1956 Upper Manhattan Medical Group, then 1959 Lotus Blossom Song. So now in the 1950s, Duke Ellington gave full credit to Billy Strayhorn as his collaborator on such compositions as Sweet Thunder. It's a 12-part suite based on the works of William Shakespeare. And then 1956, there was another composition, extended piece, Drum is a Woman, 1959. The film score, Anatomy of a Murder. The film historians recognized the soundtrack as a landmark, the first significant Hollywood film scored by African Americans. So now we're going to play this up-tempo tune called Upper Manhattan Medical Group, recorded in 1956. It was the name of the medical practice of which Duke Ellington's physician, Arthur Logan, was part of. And the composition was properly credited to Billy Strayhorn. It was premiered on the 1954 concert tour of the West Coast, though it wasn't recorded by Ellington until the pair of 1956 studio sessions that were released for Bethlehem Records. And then it was actually recorded one more time for Ellington's posthumous tribute to Strayhorn, which was an album called And His Mother Called Him Bill. So here we go with Upper Manhattan Medical Group. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. 1960s. Here we go. Duke Ellington. He was nominated for an Academy Award for his next score, which is entitled Paris Blues, 1961. In 1963, his stage work, My People. It was a cavalcade of African American history. It was mounted in Chicago as part of the Century of Negro Progress Exposition. Meanwhile, of course, he led his band in recordings and live performances in the U.S. and in Europe. He switched from Columbia Records to Reprise record label that was purchased by Warner Brothers Records and made some pop-oriented records at that time. He performed the first of his Sacred Series concerts at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco on September 16th, 1965. Let's see, another accomplishment. The Frank Sinatra film, Assault on a Queen, was an Ellington score. What else? His final film score, which was entitled Change of Mind, appeared in 1969. Then Ellington, he became a Grammy favorite in the later years. He won a Grammy in 1966 for Best Original Jazz Composition, which was entitled In the Beginning, God. It was part of the Sacred Concert Series. Then in 1967, his album, The Far East Suite, was inspired by a tour of the Middle and Far East, won the Best Instrumental Jazz Performance Grammy that year. So here we go with this composition, Isfahan. It was released in the Far East Suite in 1966 by the Ellington Orchestra. It was the first U.S. State Department sponsored tour in 1963 that took them through the Middle East and South Asia. The song was specially crafted to suit the talents of the band. The most famous saxophone player, which is Johnny Hodges, who's an alto saxophone player. Each segment of the Far East Suite is typically Ellington, with all these characteristics, using colors and rhythms and melodic contours that he had pioneered for 4 decades. So here we go with Isfahan. Billy Strayhorn, 1960s, released a solo album called The Peaceful Side. So at this time, Strayhorn's career, he never really received full credit as for his works. Ellington gave him, at this time, full credit as a collaborator for the following compositions. In 1960, The Perfume Suite was a collaboration. 1966, The Far East Suite, a collaboration. And also working on the film Anatomy of a Murder, Otto Preminger, a total success. Unfortunately, at this period of time, 1964, Strayhorn, he had cancer of the throat, which eventually led to his death in 1967. While he was in the hospital, he had submitted his final composition, was entitled Blood Counts. And that particular tune was used for the third track to Ellington's memorial album for Strayhorn, which was actually called And His Mother Called Him Bill. So Strayhorn died at an early age in 1967. His arrangements had a tremendous impact on Ellington's band. Strayhorn actually brought a more linear, classically schooled ear to Ellington's works, settling down into the permanent form, the sound and structures that Ellington used for that was actually looking for throughout his entire career. In 2015, Strayhorn was inducted into the Legacy Walk, which is in Pennsylvania. We're gonna do a quick version of Rain Check. This is a composition published in 1942. It was used to broadcast for ASCAP during that period of time. And Strayhorn said that the song's name simply was composed because it was a rainy day in Los Angeles, and then he just wrote it out. Rain Check. Here we go. Duke Ellington, 1970s. We have some Grammy winner compositions here. New Orleans Suite earned a Grammy in 1971. The Togo Brava Suite, 1972. The Ellington Suites in 1976, all Grammy winners. And then Ellington, he continued to perform regularly until he was overcome by illness in the spring of 1974. He had lung cancer and pneumonia, and unfortunately he passed away in 1974. But his death did not end the band. It was taken over by his son Mercer and by his grandson. So meanwhile, Ellington, he finally enjoyed the stage hit that he always wanted when the revue, Sophisticated Ladies, featuring his music, opened up on Broadway on March 1st of 1981 and ran for 767 performances. And that was it, Duke Ellington. At this time, we're going to play a composition which was extremely popular by the Duke Ellington Orchestra, entitled Caravan. But it was composed by a trombone player, Juan Tizol, who performed with the Duke Ellington Band. And it was first performed in 1936. Irving Mills wrote the lyrics. This song became extremely popular, and because of the exotic sound, that was the key factor, created by its melody and rhythms, it became extremely popular, and hundreds of musicians recorded that, and vocalists. So there's more than 350 recordings of the song by Duke Ellington's orchestra. And Woody Allen used the song in two of his films, Alice and Sweet and Lowdown. Those are two films. So here we go with our version to cap off our performance today. Been a great audience. Give yourself a hand. Great. Here we go with the Caravan. The maestro will give us an introduction. Okay, thank you for being a great audience. Once again, on piano, composer, educator, recording artist, Mitch Schechter. Go to the internet, and you'll see a ton of CDs, and he's got a great resume of playing with all these incredible musicians throughout the years and traveling to Europe, including myself, Vinny Cutro. Go to cdbaby.com on the internet, go to my website, and we have CDs available on his site and my site also. And I want to thank the administration here for inviting us. Thank you very much. And, have a great day. You've been a great audience, and we really appreciate your applause. All right, have a great day.